He was a criminal. He was also the most reliable intelligence asset the United States never officially admitted it had. That's how one former federal prosecutor describes him. Off the record, of course. A cartel boss, a trafficker responsible for moving an estimated 400 tons of cocaine across borders, a man whose shipments fueled violence from Sinaloa to Chicago, and yet, inside certain U.S. government buildings, his name isn't spoken with fear, it's spoken with calculation. How does a man hunted by the DEA become someone the system quietly protects? And when power shifts, who is really manipulating whom? His name is, on paper, just another alias among dozens, but inside the criminal underworld he's known as El Arquitecto, the architect. He grows up in northern Mexico, not in poverty, but in proximity. His father is a mid-level customs officer. His uncle works in local politics. He watches paperwork move faster than truth. He learns that borders aren't lines, they're transactions. By 22, he isn't running drugs, he's studying roots. He notices something most traffickers ignore. U.S. law enforcement agencies don't share intelligence in real time. The DEA has its own files, Customs has another, the FBI prioritizes domestic cells, Treasury follows money, but they rarely synchronize. The system isn't unified, it's fragmented, and fragmentation can be engineered. His first breakthrough isn't violent, it's administrative. He arranges for one of his early shipments, just 300 kilos, to be intercepted intentionally. He tips off a U.S. field office anonymously. The seizure makes headlines. Promotions are handed out. Meanwhile, 3 larger shipments pass untouched through a different corridor. The architect learns something critical. Controlled losses buy credibility. Within 2 years, he isn't just moving product, he's supplying intelligence, selective intelligence, names of rival factions, routes he no longer uses, warehouses already emptied. The DEA logs him as a confidential informant. Case number sealed. He has crossed an invisible line, and no one inside the system fully understands what that means. By 2004, his organization controls distribution channels into Texas, Arizona, and California. Street value, $1.2 billion annually. But he keeps feeding Washington crumbs. Every time pressure builds, another rival is sacrificed, another press conference is held, another major victory declared. The public sees arrests. The architect sees leverage. What happens when the government becomes dependent on a criminal for intelligence? At what point does the asset start dictating the investigation? The first sign of danger comes quietly. An internal memo inside the Department of Justice flags inconsistencies. Why do seizures tied to this source always involve secondary players? Why do wiretaps go cold right before high-level meetings? The memo circulates, and then it disappears. No explanation, no follow-up. By 2008, violence in Mexico escalates. Rival groups collapse. The architect expands into synthetic opioids, cheaper, deadlier, harder to trace. Fentanyl production increases 300% in under 18 months. U.S. overdose numbers climb. Privately, analysts at the Treasury Department begin mapping unusual money flows, billions moving through shell corporations tied to ports in Houston and Long Beach. The name connected to several transactions, one of the architect's aliases. But when investigators push for a full indictment, they hit a wall. Active intelligence asset, reads the classification note. Signed, approved, sealed. Someone high enough inside the system believes he's more valuable free than captured. And that's when the architect makes his boldest move yet. He requests a meeting. Not with local agents, with federal supervisors. He offers something unprecedented, inside access to a rival cartel planning coordinated attacks on U.S. Border Patrol stations. In exchange, immunity, not written, not public, but understood. The meeting happens in a nondescript building outside El Paso. No recordings, no official transcript, just handshakes and deniability. When he leaves that room, he isn't just a cartel boss anymore. He's untouchable. For now. But power built on secrets always fractures somewhere. The question isn't whether the system knows. It's who inside the system decides to act, and someone is about to. By 2010, the architect isn't running a cartel. He's running infrastructure. 7 distribution hubs across the Southwest. 12 maritime routes. Private airstrips hidden under agricultural licenses. His logistics resemble a multinational corporation more than a criminal network. Estimated annual revenue, $3.8 billion. He diversifies. Methamphetamine production doubles. Fentanyl precursors arrive through Pacific ports disguised as industrial solvents. His organization moves product into 38 U.S. states. Meanwhile, his intelligence tips continue. He feeds the DEA information on splinter groups, supplies names of rogue lieutenants, delivers GPS coordinates to stash houses that are already emptied. Each win strengthens his handler's reputation. Each press conference adds legitimacy to a lie. But numbers don't stay quiet. quiet forever. Between 2011 and 2013, opioid-related deaths in the U.S. increased by nearly 70%. Analysts inside the CDC trace a disproportionate supply surge to one corridor, Texas to the Midwest. Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network flags $11.2 billion in suspicious transactions routed through shell companies tied to logistics firms in Monterey. The same alias surfaces again. This time, the data doesn't disappear. An interagency task force forms quietly. FBI counterintelligence, Treasury analysts, a small, isolated DOJ review team. No DEA field agents included. They suspect a protected source is gaming the system. They don't yet know how deeply. One forensic accountant notices something strange. Every time a rival cartel leader is arrested following one of the Arquitect's tips, market share consolidates under a single distribution network. His coincidence or coordinated cleansing? By 2014, surveillance begins without informing his handlers. They tap secondary phones, monitor encrypted messaging apps, follow money transfers through offshore trusts in Panama and Cyprus. What they uncover shifts the narrative entirely. The Architect isn't just tipping off U.S. agencies, he's predicting them. He studies seizure patterns, arrest cycles, budget allocations. He times his shipments to exploit federal funding deadlines, knowing agencies rush results before fiscal year reports. He understands the system's incentives better than the system understands his. And then comes the betrayal. A mid-level lieutenant in Chicago is arrested during a botched drop. Unlike the others, this one talks, not about routes, about meetings. He describes a private encounter between the Architect and two U.S. officials in 2012. He claims immunity was promised, claims certain corridors were declared hands-off. If true, it's not just corruption, it's compromise at a federal level. Internal panic spreads. Was he an asset, or was the government shielding the largest trafficker in North America? The DOJ review team demands access to sealed files, requests documentation for immunity agreements. There are none. No written deals, no prosecutorial immunity filed with the courts, just classified memoranda labeling him critical to national security. National security. That phrase changes everything, because now the CIA enters the room. An intelligence briefing suggests the Architect provided information on Central American trafficking routes connected to terrorist financing networks. His tips may have disrupted more than drug shipments. The moral calculus grows complicated. If he prevented one major attack, does that justify thousands of overdose deaths? Who makes that trade? In 2015, Congress quietly inquires about confidential informant oversight. The inquiry stalls. Behind closed doors, agencies argue jurisdiction. The Architect senses movement. 3 of his offshore accounts are frozen without warning. A warehouse in Arizona is raided without prior notification to his handlers. Someone broke protocol. He responds strategically, not with violence, with exposure. Encrypted files are delivered anonymously to 2 investigative journalists in Washington. The documents suggest federal awareness of his operations dating back nearly a decade. Selective leaks, just enough to cause fear. If he falls, he implies, others fall with him. Now the stakes are no longer criminal. They are political. Could indicting him trigger hearings that expose classified operations? How many careers depend on keeping him operational? Inside the White House Situation Room, a briefing is presented. Overdose numbers, media pressure, internal memos. The name El Arquitecto spoken aloud for the first time at that level. The recommendation? Neutralize exposure risk. That phrase carries multiple meanings. Arrest? Extradition? Silencing? No one states it plainly. Meanwhile, the Architect consolidates power further. He eliminates 2 internal rivals suspected of cooperating, tightens communication channels, moves primary residents to a guarded compound in Jalisco. Satellite imagery shows increased security. He is preparing, but for what? In late 2016, a sealed federal indictment is finally drafted. 23 counts: narcotics trafficking, money laundering, conspiracy. It sits unsigned for 9 weeks, waiting, because once it's activated, there is no quiet resolution, only public reckoning, and someone at the highest level must decide whether the system can survive that. Before the decision is made, the Architect makes one final call to his contact. February 2017, a Gulfstream jet registered to a Shell corporation lifts off from Toluca, destination listed as Vancouver. Mid-flight, the pilot receives new coordinates, U.S. airspace clearance, federal escort. The Architect doesn't resist. He knew this was coming. What he doesn't know is which version of the government is waiting for him. When the plane lands in San Diego under sealed warrant authority, there are no cameras, no perp walk, no press release. U.S. Marshals move him through a private hangar and into an armored convoy. Officially, he has just been captured in a cooperative extradition. Unofficially, negotiations begin within hours, because once he is in custody, the leverage flips. Or does it? Inside a federal holding facility, he requests one thing: a classified proffer session. Not with prosecutors alone, with representatives from 3 agencies: DEA, FBI, CIA. He brings numbers, encrypted ledgers, transaction histories, histories, meeting dates, names. He doesn't threaten loudly. He doesn't have to. If I testify, he reportedly says, I don't testify alone. For prosecutors, the math is brutal. Going to trial could expose 10 years of informant handling, sealed directives, intelligence trade-offs. Defense attorneys would subpoena internal memos. Congressional committees would demand explanations. Why was the largest fentanyl trafficker labeled an asset? Why were certain corridors protected? Who authorized the classification? And what would juries think if they saw those documents? The sealed indictment holds 23 counts. The plea agreement, when it finally emerges, reduces them to 5. Conspiracy, limited money laundering, no terrorism enhancements, no public discussion of intelligence relationships. Sentence recommendation, 18 years. In federal terms, it is heavy. In strategic terms, it is containment. The courtroom is quiet when he enters. No dramatic statements, no outbursts. He pleads guilty to a narrowed narrative, a cartel leader who cooperated at times with authorities. Nothing more. No mention of the El Paso meeting. No acknowledgement of fiscal year manipulation. No explanation for frozen memos. Outside, headlines frame it as a victory. Kingpin captured. Major blow to drug trade. Inside Washington, relief moves silently through hallways. Crisis averted or buried, because within 2 years of his sentencing, overdose numbers don't drop. They climb. New networks fill the vacuum almost immediately. Smaller, less centralized, harder to penetrate. The intelligence advantage the government once quietly relied on evaporates. A classified after-action review circulates through senior ranks. Conclusion. While ethically complex, the use of high-level assets provided strategic disruption benefits. Strategic, the word returns. The architect serves time in a high-security federal prison, restricted communication, monitored correspondence. Yet rumors persist. Some believe he still consults indirectly, that insights from debriefings reshape interdiction strategies along the southern border, that certain names he withheld remain bargaining chips for future leverage, because deals like this rarely end cleanly. Here's the part no press conference addresses. If the government knowingly tolerates criminal expansion in exchange for selective intelligence, where does accountability live? And if dismantling one empire destabilizes covert operations elsewhere, what choice does the system make? 18 years becomes 14 with reductions for cooperation. Projected release, 2031. By then, an entire generation of traffickers will have studied his playbook. They will understand fragmentation, incentives, budget cycles. They will understand that power doesn't always come from defying the system. Sometimes it comes from feeding it. A former Treasury analyst later reflects anonymously. He didn't beat the government. He studied it. Then he became part of it. No formal inquiry ever publicly dissects the asset relationship. Congressional oversight hearings remain classified. Internal reforms adjust informant guidelines quietly without referencing his name. The system absorbs the shock. It survived. But survival isn't the same as transparency. And somewhere in federal archives, sealed files still map the decade when a cartel boss negotiated from a position few criminals ever reach. Parody. If you think this was extreme, wait until you see what happened in the case of the arms dealer who manipulated 2 governments at once. Because sometimes the real story isn't the criminal, it's the system that made him possible.